fracture at that level, which runs through the bone. So this is what we would describe as a comminuted fracture, and it's commonly associated with crush injury.
In your decades of practice, Dr. Moore, have you ever seen a comminuted fracture like this result from an object thrown in the way that Mr. Depp described?
Well, not with the constellation of findings shown on the X-rays. I mean, I think that could create a fracture, but in this setting, it wouldn't create a fracture with without the associated other injuries that we would anticipate.
And in your decades of practice, when you see a comminuted fracture like this, what are some things that have typically caused it?
So crush mechanisms could be slammed in a drawer, caught between two logs in the fireplace, car door, sliding glass door. Those are all any mechanism that squeezes the finger between two hard opposing surfaces could create this type of injury.
In the statements of Mr. Depp that you reviewed, how did he describe what happened to the alleged bottle when it hit the bar?
I believe he said it exploded, shattered.
If a bottle had exploded near his finger in the way that he alleges, what would you expect to see in the documents that you have reviewed?
Well, I think that the physicians did a good job of documenting the presentation, the appearance of the wound. They did not document the presence of any glass shards, and there were no other associated injuries elsewhere on the hand.
Okay. And I just want to step back for 1 minute. Michelle, can you pull up the next page of the X-ray here? Thank you. And Dr. Moore, just before we move on from X-rays, can you, I know that this, when it's blown up like this, it's a little bit blurry, but can you point out or describe to the jury where the multiple bone fragments are in the finger?
So they're in the very tip. You know, if you see the joint, and then there's what we call the transverse fracture, which is across the middle of the bone in the same plane as the joint, and then the multiple fragments are in the tuft. With a Xerox copy, the quality is not as detailed as a true X-ray.
You can take that down, please, Michelle. Thank you. So back to the glass. In the records that you reviewed, Dr. Moore, did you see any adjacent injuries? In other words, injuries to any other part of Mr. Depp's hand other than the tip of his middle finger?
No.
And is that observation consistent with the explosion of glass type phenomenon that Mr. Depp alleges?
Well, I think in the setting of a glass explosion like that, where there's multiple fragments and the tip of the fingers cut off, you would anticipate that there would be other lacerations.
Did you review the documentation in the medical records from the hospital in Australia?
Yes.
Did any of those providers report retrieving glass from the wound?
No.
What about any glass near the site of the injury?
No.
What about any glass in other parts of the hand?
No.
What about any glass in any of the other fingers?
No.
Is there any reference at all, Dr. Moore, that you've seen to any glass in the records that you've reviewed?
No.
And Dr. Moore, in your decades of practice, have you ever seen an injury associated with a glass explosion that was focused on the end of a single finger in the way Mr. Depp describes?
Well, not consistent with the clinical images and the findings in this case, no.
Have you ever seen an injury associated with an alleged glass explosion where no other glass was found on any part of the patient's body or clothing or anything?
No.
And because there's been talk of a glass explosion, Dr. Moore, there's seems to have been a suggestion that somehow glass may have sliced off the end of Mr. Depp's finger. Is that what's going on here?
No, this wound doesn't really appear to be a sharp glass laceration.
You referred earlier to an avulsion, which is a term I had never heard